Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Hidden Tales. Your support helps bring more powerful stories to life. The house was wrapped in complete darkness when the clock on the microwave blinked 3 a.m., its faint green light the only thing cutting through the silence. The wife lay on the living room couch, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other gripping the fabric beneath her as a sharp, blinding pain tore through her body without warning. This contraction was different, stronger, faster, merciless. She gasped, struggling to breathe, realizing instantly that this wasn't false labor. This was real, and it was happening now. She was completely alone. Another wave of pain slammed into her, forcing a cry from her throat. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, dialing her millionaire husband's number from memory.
Once. Twice.
Straight to voicemail. She tried again, her thumb slipping on the screen as sweat beaded along her forehead. No answer. The panic that followed was worse than the pain itself. Her doctor's words echoed in her mind. High risk, call immediately if anything feels wrong. Something felt very wrong. Her breathing became shallow. The room felt smaller, tighter, as another contraction ripped through her lower back. She slid to the floor, fighting tears, fear clawing at her chest. With shaking fingers, she opened her phone again and dialed 911. Please, she sobbed the moment the dispatcher answered, her voice breaking. I'm pregnant. I'm in labor. I'm alone. It hurts so bad. The dispatcher's calm voice cut through the chaos, grounding her. They asked her to breathe, to stay with them, to describe the pain. Between gasps, she followed every instruction, counting through contractions, gripping the edge of the couch as her body shook uncontrollably. The minutes stretched endlessly, every second a battle between fear and survival. Then, faint at first, she heard it, the distant wail of sirens growing louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, washing the walls in color. Relief hit her so hard she cried, clutching her belly as the dispatcher assured her help had arrived. In that moment, fear gave way to instinct. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was fighting to survive. Cold night air rushed over her skin as the front door burst open and 2 EMTs hurried inside, their voices urgent but controlled. Within seconds, she was being lifted onto a stretcher, straps securing her trembling body as another contraction surged through her. She cried out, fingers clutching the thin blanket as they wheeled her outside, the flashing lights of the ambulance slicing through the darkness. The world blurred as the doors slammed shut and the vehicle lurched forward, sirens screaming into the night. Inside the ambulance, everything smelled sterile and sharp. One EMT checked her vitals while the other spoke calmly, reminding her to breathe, to focus. Between gasps, she reached for her phone again. Her hand shook so badly, she almost dropped it. She typed quickly, tears splashing onto the screen. I'm in labor. I had to call 911. She stared at the message after sending it, heart pounding. This time, she was sure he would respond. He had to. Fear mixed with hope as the ambulance sped toward the hospital, every bump sending pain through her body. She imagined him waking up, reading the text, rushing out the door. She whispered his name under her breath, like a prayer. Another contraction hit, stealing her breath. She squeezed her eyes shut, counting just like the dispatcher had told her. Then her phone vibrated in her hand. Her heart leaped. She looked down, expecting his name to light up the screen. Instead, an unfamiliar number stared back at her. Confusion flickered through the pain. Why would someone else be answering his phone? The vibration stopped, then started again, insisting she look. As the ambulance sped through the empty streets, she opened the message, her pulse racing. In that instant, before she even read the words, a cold sense of dread washed over her. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. The message loaded slowly, as if the phone itself hesitated to deliver it. When the words finally appeared, they felt sharper than the pain tearing through her body. The tone was calm, almost bored, and unmistakably feminine. The sender introduced herself without apology, explaining that she was his secretary and that he was currently busy and unreachable. There was no concern, no urgency, not even a question about her condition. The words that followed made her stomach drop. She was told there was no need to panic, that calling 911 was an overreaction, and that everything could have been handled more appropriately in the morning. The secretary added that she was managing his phone for the night and would pass along any important messages later. Her hands went numb as she read it again, hoping she had misunderstood. Busy? Unreachable? At 3 a.m, while his wife was in labor. Another contraction hit, but this time she barely felt it. Something inside her cracked instead. Her chest tightened, breath catching as tears spilled freely. One of the EMTs noticed immediately, asking if she was okay, if the pain was getting worse. She couldn't answer. She just stared at the screen, betrayal settling deep in her bones. The pain of labor had nothing on this. This hurt went deeper, cutting into trust, into love, into everything she thought her marriage was. As the ambulance sped on, her mind drifted backward, clinging to memories like fragments of another life. She remembered the day they met, how charming he'd been, how his ambition had seemed exciting instead of consuming. He wasn't a millionaire then, just a driven man with big dreams and tired eyes. They had fallen in love quickly, intensely, believing they were building something together. When success came, it came fast. Promotions turned into companies, long hours turned into endless absences. At first, she told herself it was temporary, that sacrifices were necessary. But anniversaries were forgotten. Calls went unanswered. Dinners grew cold while she waited alone. Somewhere along the way, the secretary appeared, not just as an employee, but as a constant presence. He mentioned her name often, trusted her completely. She scheduled his life, filtered his messages, spoke for him more and more. The wife remembered moments she brushed off, the secretary answering his phone too casually, standing too close, knowing things she shouldn't. She had ignored the warnings, choosing trust over doubt. Now, lying in an ambulance, she saw it all clearly and hated herself for not seeing it sooner. The hospital lights were blinding as the ambulance doors opened. She was rushed through automatic doors, voices calling out her condition, wheels rattling beneath her as they hurried her down sterile hallways. Nurses surrounded her, efficient and focused, asking questions she struggled to answer. One of them asked gently where the father was. Shame burned her cheeks. She forced out a weak lie, saying he was on his way, stuck somewhere important. The words tasted bitter. Another contraction folded her in half, pain crashing through her body as fear and heartbreak collided. Tears soaked into the pillow beneath her head. Her phone buzzed again. Against her better judgment, she looked. Another message from the same number, colder than before, reminding her not to disturb him and to keep updates professional. In that moment, as pain racked her body and humiliation crushed her spirit, she realized she was truly alone, fighting for her child without the man who was supposed to be by her side. Lying beneath harsh hospital lights, waiting for the next contraction, her thoughts kept circling back to the woman on the other end of those messages. The secretary wasn't just a name on a screen anymore. She was real, deliberate, calculated. She had been with him for years, long enough to know every detail of his life, his meetings, his moods, his weaknesses. She scheduled his days down to the minute, decided who could reach him and who could not. Somewhere along the way, that power had grown into something else. She didn't just manage his calendar, she managed his world. The wife remembered how often she had been told, "Talk to my secretary," even for personal matters. How messages meant for him were filtered, delayed, sometimes never delivered. The secretary knew when he slept, when he traveled, when he was stressed. She spoke with authority, confidence, as if she belonged there. And the way she had answered tonight, cold, dismissive, possessive, made it clear this wasn't about professionalism anymore. This was dominance. There had always been subtle games. A polite smile that lingered too long. Comments meant to remind the wife who controlled access to him. Invitations forgotten. Calls missed. Nothing obvious enough to accuse, but enough to unsettle. Now, in the most vulnerable moment of her life, that same woman had positioned herself between a husband and his laboring wife, deciding what mattered and what didn't. An affair wasn't confirmed, but it hovered in every word, every delay, every choice. And somehow, that unspoken truth felt heavier than a confession. Her thoughts were shattered by pain as labor intensified without mercy. Nurses moved quickly, voices steady as they guided her through pushing, through breathing, through fear. Time blurred into pressure and screams and tears. Her body worked on instinct alone, driven by something older and stronger than heartbreak. And then, suddenly, a cry pierced the room. Not hers, but small and powerful. Her baby was born. Relief flooded her as the child was placed on her chest, warm and alive. She sobbed uncontrollably, overwhelmed by love and loss all at once. Joy and devastation tangled together as she kissed that tiny forehead, whispering promises through tears. The room felt unbearably quiet without him there. No hand to hold hers. No voice saying she did well. As she held her child close, the truth settled in with painful clarity. It wasn't her husband who had saved her tonight. It was that trembling call to 911. That call had brought help, safety, life. And in that realization, something inside her changed forever. It was supposed to be quiet after the birth, a fragile calm settling over the room as her baby slept against her chest. But the truth has a way of slipping out when no one is guarding it. A nurse entered to check vitals and casually mentioned that her husband had called earlier, asking which room she was in but never coming up. Another staff member, unaware of the tension, added that he'd sounded distracted, that there had been loud music in the background. Confusion tightened her grip on the blanket. Something didn't add up. When the room finally emptied, she reached for her phone, her heart pounding with a sense of dread she could no longer ignore. She opened her call logs and messages, scrolling slowly, carefully. The timestamps told a story no one could explain away. While she was screaming through contractions, while EMTs were lifting her onto a stretcher, his phone had been active, just not with her. A quick search confirmed it. The location pinged from his credit card notification showed a luxury hotel across town, a place known for privacy and indulgence. Her chest felt hollow as she realized the truth. He hadn't been asleep. He hadn't been unreachable. He had been there, and the secretary had been with him the entire time, acting as a gatekeeper by choice, not circumstance. The messages suddenly looked different. The cold tone, the dismissive language, the confidence. It wasn't professionalism, it was intentional. She had protected him while silencing the woman in labor carrying his child. The betrayal was complete, undeniable, and devastating in its clarity. When he finally arrived hours later, dressed too neatly for a man who had rushed from an emergency, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked at him with a calm that unsettled him more than anger ever could. She told him she knew where he'd been. She told him she had called 911 while his secretary told her to stop overreacting. He tried to brush it aside, muttering excuses about stress, about misunderstandings, about money-solving problems. He downplayed the emergency, called it dramatic, inconvenient. Then she asked him to explain why his secretary had answered his phone. The color drained from his face as she repeated the words that woman had sent while she was fighting to bring his child into the world. The secretary stood nearby, silent now, her power gone in an instant. No explanations worked. No amount of wealth softened the truth. She told him plainly that money could not buy back trust, and it could not erase abandonment. That moment changed everything. She decided then that she was done shrinking herself to fit his world. Plans formed quietly but firmly, custody, lawyers, a future built without him. When she left the hospital days later, baby in her arms, she walked past him without looking back. Fear no longer led her steps. Strength did. Months later, life looked different. Smaller, quieter, but honest. She often thought about that call at 3 a.m, about the dispatcher's calm voice and the sirens cutting through the dark. 911 had saved her life and her child's, when the man she trusted chose not to. Her husband faced consequences he couldn't escape, and the secretary lost the control she once wielded so confidently. In the end, the most powerful moment of her life wasn't the betrayal. It was the call she made that proved she could survive, protect herself, and choose her own worth. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Hidden Tales.